Beyond the attractive couch lie the sexual parts of the flower. In this orchid, two distinct masses of pollen, called pollinia, are attached to a central column by short, flexible stalks. The bases of these stalks are very sticky. They attach readily to an arriving insect's head as it bumps into them. Below them is another sticky surface. It's the female stigma, ready to receive pollinia brought in unwittingly on the head of another insect. Fertilized, the ovary below the flower will produce a capsule containing some 2 million tiny seeds. The day has been noisy with the hum of busy insects. The bright colors are very alluring and the scent wafts on the breeze. This is known as the pyramidal orchid. It's shaped like a pyramid, and to its new flowers, butterflies are irresistibly drawn. This painted lady is first to take a sip with its delicate proboscis, but it picks up more than nectar. With the speed of instant glue, a pair of pollinia grip the proboscis. Try as it may, the butterfly can't dislodge them. They cling on stubbornly, and obviously so great an irritation that the insect gives up any further attempt at feeding. This butterfly is apparently so greedy that it doesn't seem to notice the growing number of pollinia becoming attached, a process that's most satisfactory for the orchid. But there comes a time when even such greed is overcome by the butterfly's desperate need to free itself of this cumbersome load. It can no longer reach into the flower for nectar anyway, a double frustration. In the game of pollination, this orchid wins every time. The broad-leaved helleborine favours growing in the shade, but it's mostly at the edge of the woodland that there's much insect activity. The helleborine offers its nectar by the cupful. Held in the cavity of the lip, it lies like a pond for some insects to paddle in. Small bees don't often play a part in pollination. The nectar is often accessible without the bee making contact with the pollinia overhead. Occasionally, small bees do collect pollinia, but the most efficient pollinators are the much larger wasps. The holly orchid, too, offers a rich supply of nectar to the variety of insects that are attracted. So intent is this bumblebee on getting its fill of nectar that it seems not to notice the ever-growing crown of pollinia on its head. And with every clumsy bear hug, the orchid is fertilized, and the bee more than rewarded with the enticing liquid. So frequent and intensive does the bee's drinking become, it almost falls from the flower at times. But the intoxicating scent of the orchid pulls it back. The flower prolongs the visit, increasing its chances of fertilization. This bug orchid, too, drugs its pollinators with scent until they drop off. They take some time to recover. The strong, sweet fragrance of the bug orchid hangs on the air in the humid meadows. It draws a steady stream of insects. The most common visitors are honeybees. Among the bug orchids grow these fan-lipped orchids. Their flowers look attractive, but contain no nectar. Behind the lip, the spur is just an empty sac. To achieve pollination, this flower relies on deceit. It must fool a large insect into landing on its flower as they fly between the nectar-rich bug orchids. The large insects are busy with the rewarding bug orchid. The small insects are no use at all to the nearby fan-lipped orchid. The bee flies off, but to another bug orchid. The deceiver will wait for another time, an empty bloom silently screaming for attention. The slopes of Mount Meron in Galilee. Here there grows a wild orchid that's unique to this country and known simply as the Israeli orchid. It too bears flowers without nectar. So, how does it attract pollinators? A clue to this mystery lies in the resemblance of this bloom to the flower of Bellavalia. And Bellavalia is a flower rich in nectar. The bee fly, Bombilius, taxis out for takeoff, its monster proboscis at the ready. Its mission? To gather nectar from the Bellavalia. Cunningly set among the Bellavalia, the Israeli orchid deceives the bee fly on its busy round. The mimicry is perfect. The bee fly probes even though the nectar isn't there. It should emerge with the orchid's pollinia attached, but this time it didn't work. The orchid can't win every game. Some insects are not fooled by the mimic. They'll ignore the Israeli orchid. But the many seed-filled capsules attest to the mimic's frequent success. Israel's Mediterranean landscape is perfumed by the fragrance of thorny broom, sage, savory, and lavender. And among those scents and thorns and flowers, the white rock rose offers a bright invitation to passing bees. Close to it may be found an orchid that echoes that invitation. There's more than casual resemblance between the two flowers. The sword-leaved helleborine, to the eye of the tiny Halictus bees, blends with these nearby rock roses, whose flowers offer a golden treasury of pollen. Darting rapidly from flower to flower, Occasionally it meets one that offers false gold. There's no pollen here for the feet of the bee to collect. But on the next flower, there is. The orchid exploits its visitor's confusion and succeeds in attaching and transferring its white pollinia on the back of the bee. But the insects get nothing in return for their services. Neither the bees nor the occasional nectar-seeking fly find any sustenance here. The bee is simply a go-between, passing the pollinia on its back from orchid to orchid. The sword-leaved helleborine is most successfully insect-pollinated in the open. But it's really a plant of the shade, where, on its own, it must rely more on its scent to lure insects to its unrewarding flowers. Another orchid grows here too, sharing the shade of trees such as this eastern strawberry tree. Known as the violet limodor, it's quite different from other orchids in Israel. It has no leaves and lives rather like a fungus by extracting nourishment from the decomposing leaf litter in the ground. It stores that food in a swollen rhizome. It's also, at times, a remarkable mimic. A bee can also self-fertilize a flower by brushing the pollen down from the pollinia onto the sticky surface of the stigma on the central column. The violet limodor does offer some rewards. There is nectar, but deep down in the spur of the flower, though this distracts the bee away from touching the pollinia overhead. But larger bees will also come to sip, and they'll collect the pollinia on their backs as they drink. This orchid seems to leave little to chance. Of all faces of Israel, the one that would seem least likely to look with favor on the lush beauty of an orchid is the southern desert. But where nature smiles in this dry expanse with a spring-fed oasis, the complexion of the rock is changed by a rare bloom of the scarce marsh helleborine, evergreen in the heart of a desert. Curiously, it opens its tropical-style flowers not only here in the sun, but in a quite opposite extreme. Watered by floods from melting snows, the scarce marsh helleborine flourishes here in northern Israel too, though surprisingly rather smaller than its desert relative. To the hoverflies that are present in large numbers, the open orchid displays two yellow guides as an invitation to seek the sweet nectar within, beyond the springboard-like lip. It's a springboard that bounces the arriving hoverflies up against the pollinia, effectively trapping them. This larger fly can move, but is still held by the pollinia which remain attached to the flower. This tiny fly isn't as strong and is held more closely in an embrace that is essential to the orchid's pollination. large fly finally breaks free. But for this one, the embrace is fatal. The insect will die in the unrelinquished grip of the satisfied orchid. Even more remarkable and macabre is the way this orchid selects its victims. This pattern of dark spots possibly looks like aphids clustered within the open flower to a female hoverfly. And if the scent of the flower were also to resemble that of aphids, then the ploy would be perfect. For hoverfly females lay their eggs near a colony of aphids. The emerging larvae feed on them. So, lured by the false impression, the females seek to lay their eggs where aphids appear to be, and so approach the flower. Already carrying pollinia from a previous encounter, this choosy female licks a sugary secretion from this flower, which will give her the vital energy needed for egg laying. Still seeking a right place, she enters the flower and brushes the pollinia against the stigma, and then moves on. Finally, she makes the decision to lay and deposits an egg on the edge of the lip. She'll lay eggs on various parts of several flowers, but the larvae will starve to death. This orchid's deception seems very cruel, a ploy that sacrifices the next generation of its willing pollinators in the interest of its own future survival. More than any other flower, the orchids have developed the art of deceiving insects to an almost unbelievable degree. This is a Galilean orchid. It offers no nectar to this male Halictus bee, and female bees ignore the plant. And yet the male is clearly passionately attached to the flower. He's certainly not looking for food in this unusual inverted position. So what is the attraction? A bee orchid and a beetle would seem to have little in common. What is it about this bee orchid that suddenly drives a male beetle into such a frenzy? The beetle, it seems, perceives the orchid as a huge and super desirable female beetle. He can hardly contain his desire to mate. To the bee orchid, the frantic advances of this passing beetle are of no interest. The flower is designed to attract the attention of a much larger suitor. Somewhere in the crowd of insects busy among these dwarf shrubs, there's the one exact customer for which the orchid is so passionately advertising. But what is it that will lure the long-horned bee away from the pleasures of other flowers? These virgin flowers not only look like female bees, but smell like them. They exude a seductive perfume identical to that secreted by female bees. Males are irresistibly drawn into an embrace. What follows is a sequence of remarkable events. He is further deceived by the shape and furry texture of her bee-like lip. He attempts to mate, but will never achieve his own satisfaction. Frustrated, he'll move from flower to flower. But that's a part of the orchid's ploy. Were he to be satisfied, he'd quickly lose interest and fly off before collecting pollinia. The The orchid drives the bees into so great a passion that rival males will struggle to possess a single flower. Suddenly, these yellow pollinia attach to one of them. A success for the orchid, but no satisfaction for the bee, who persists with this hopeless mating. He finally has to rest a while, and the two pollinia complete a forward bending movement that'll leave them well aimed and ready for the bee's next onslaught on a flower. The bee will visit other flowers following its usual routine, but eventually he'll be lured into the same deception by another bee orchid, where the pollinia will make precise contact with the stigma ahead and leave their pollen grains. Successfully fertilized, the deceiving flower fades, and in the following days, the capsule swells with the developing seeds and rises to stand upright, the ideal position for scattering the seeds to the wind. The dry heat of early summer shrivels the spent blooms of spring. But while death stains some, other orchids only now unfurl to the sun. Able to withstand its greater intensity, they bring a fresh magic to the drying face of Israel. The hot breath of summer drifts under dormant trees and plucks the fine seeds of the orchids from their drying capsules. The magic is hidden now, locked tight within each twinkling mote. The orchid's life lies buried in the earth. Now, across this tinder dry shrubland, there steals a force that is at once enemy and friend. Consumed by fire, the bush falls back, opening the ground to the sun. In their wake, the flames leave death, but also life. It's a paradox of nature that on the wasteland of this destruction, the wild orchids of Israel will thrive. Their magic will sound again.